Welcome back to Inhibition. Today we're going back to our series on exposing propaganda in the media, and we're back to the Young Turks. It's time we talk about it. Alright, welcome back. So looking at this, you can see right from the screen, we're going to talk about the Young Turks and the McCloskeys who got pardoned recently. And we're going to talk about this topic. Anna here, Kasparian's going to talk about it. But I want to point out the absolute propaganda in this video. And so we're going to just watch the video, respond, look at some facts, and expose more propaganda with the Young Turks. So let's just jump right into the video.
Remember the McCloskeys? You know, the gun nut couple that decided to draw their weapons in a...
Now, before we keep going, I just want to point out she immediately calls them the gun nut couple. So there's no lack of bias here, I'll put it that way. And of course, the Young Turks doesn't pretend to be unbiased. They are definitely left-leaning progressives, and they make that very clear. But I just want to point out that fact, like, immediately they go to calling them gun nuts. Now, no evidence to back that up, no evidence to back up that they are gun nuts or what that phrase even means. It's just a way to demean them. And you'll see that quite a bit as we keep going. Let's keep watching.
Artfully on Black Lives Matter protesters. Well, it turns out that they face some criminal charges for doing that. You know, brandishing those weapons is actually a crime. You're breaking some rules there.
All right, we're going to talk about the crimes that they were charged with and go ahead and look into this, which Anna's not going to really give you the details on this. So I'm going to break these details down really for you real quick. But you can see here, she says that they broke some rules. They were brandishing those weapons against the protesters. She calls them Black Lives Matter protesters and just tries to act like they're all innocent. What she doesn't actually expound on is that they entered a private area that they had no authority, private property that they had no authority to go onto. Now, the protesters were trying to get to the mayor's house. They broke into a private gated street that they had no legal authority to be at. Of course, when someone breaks into private property, whether they're doing anything or not, they're breaking into private property. That's going to put you on alarm. So the McCloskeys were alarmed. Their house is right there at the gate. So they saw it all happen. According to the McCloskeys, they made threats to them after Mark McCloskey, the man in this photo, he told them, hey, it's a private area. You're not allowed to be here. They started making threats at him because they were mad. And that's when they went in and got the guns because they were in fear because they were now making threats to them. That's the story according to Mark. That's not on video. That's a he said, she said kind of thing. So we don't really 100% know what was said until the video started. But he has made the case that he was in fear. And it is a fact that they broke into a private gated community that they had no legal authority to be on. And therefore, this wasn't they weren't in public. They weren't on public access. It was private. That being said, she said they broke some rules. I just want to point out what they were charged with. Now, she'll mention it here in just a moment, but I want to look originally what they were charged with. They were indicted originally with felony charges of unlawful use of a weapon and tampering with evidence. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into the tampering with evidence, but basically they were charged with that. The gun that the woman had, the firing pin had been altered, and they thought that she did that, or they claimed she did that after. Proof came out that she did not alter it. The firing pin was incorrect on purpose from the very beginning, and therefore, when she was pointing that gun, technically speaking, she was posing no threat to anybody. Now, of course, because the gun couldn't fire, the firing pin had been altered. Now, the Young Turks is not going to tell you that, but that's what they were originally charged with, is felony charges of unlawful use of a weapon and tampering with evidence. That went back and forth. It was completely bogus charges. They were overcharged. Nothing like that actually occurred. What they ended up doing is pleading guilty to misdemeanors. They dropped the charges from the felonies to misdemeanors, and specifically She was charged, the wife was charged with misdemeanor harassment in order to pay a fine of $2,000. Her husband pleaded guilty to misdemeanor fourth-degree assault for threatening the passerby with the AR-15. He was fined $750. That's what was the charge. Now, I want to point out that after they were charged, they actually, ended up saying, yes, we agree to the charges, we plead guilty. But I want you to see what Mark McCloskeys said, because I think he makes a valid point. It says, it's kind of humorous for me at any rate, the charge they finally settled on for me, because that's exactly what I did do. The whole point of the Second Amendment. We stood out there with guns, and that placed them in imminent fear of physical injury, and they back off. They didn't attack us. And his point is he would absolutely do it again. He was basically saying, look, we felt in fear of our lives. We pulled out our guns. We didn't shoot anybody. We pulled out our guns intentionally to scare them, to keep them from attacking us. Yeah, I am in full agreement with that. Absolutely. I don't think they did anything wrong, nor do I really think they should have been charged with anything. But he's making the point that, yes, you're saying I caused fear in the protesters. Yes, he's saying I did, and that was exactly my intent, was to cause them fear so they don't attack me because I was in fear. Yeah, absolutely. So she points out that they were charged because they broke some rules, acting like it, you broke some rules. How dare you? They were originally, she's not going to bring up this context, they were originally charged politically with felonies, and it was a political motivation, completely bogus charges. Those were eventually dropped, and the misdemeanor, almost no big deal really, charges were filed against them, because if you're going to charge them with anything, that's all you could charge them with. She kind of leaves out all that political context. Just wanted to point it out. But let's keep listening to what she has to say. The real propaganda goes a little bit further, a little bit later in the video. Let's keep going.
But it turns out that they have been pardoned. So that's the update to the story. Missouri Governor Mike Parson announced that he would wipe Mark and Patricia McCloskeys' records clean, along with those of 10 other people, while the couple was ordered to pay approximately $3,000 in fines. The pardon means that they actually no longer have to pay. So there are other ramifications of this pardon. In June, Mark McCloskey pleaded guilty to misdemeanor fourth-degree assault and was fined $750, while his wife pleaded guilty to misdemeanor harassment and was fined $2,000. The couple also gave up the high-powered guns they used in the confrontation.
Now I want to point out, I know she's quoting the Huffington Post, but this is a propaganda piece from someone she's quoting rather than her own self. High-powered guns. Now, you can try to make the argument that an AR-15 is high-powered. In reality, it's a semi-automatic weapon just like any other semi-automatic weapon. It's not any more high-powered than any other gun that pretty much anyone in America owns. But the woman had a little small pistol. But notice they don't say the high-powered gun he used and her pistol. They're labeling that little small pistol as a high-powered gun too. It's propaganda within the Huffington Post or HuffPost, but just pointing that out. Let's keep going.
So does that mean, since they're pardoned, that they get all of those guns back?
Judging by the castle that they live in, I think they were going to be okay guns-wise either way, but I don't know.
So, look, I'm not a proponent of draconian, tough on crime nonsense. With that said, this is not an example of that, right? The initial charges before the pardon, not an example of that. What they did was irresponsible.
Now notice she says the initial charges before the pardon were not an example of draconian, tough on crime things, but they actually were. The initial charges, which she doesn't mention here, the initial charges were felony charges that were absolutely draconian, trying to be quote unquote tough on crime, when really it was politically motivated. The charges that they pled guilty to were not that. The misdemeanor charges they pled guilty to, but the original felony charges absolutely were that and more. She completely ignores that. Kids, keep going.
What they did was wrong, and they deserve to suffer the consequences of that, which, to be quite honest, weren't severe consequences. They had to pay a fine, They were charged with misdemeanors.
That was it.
And look at that. I mean, it's just, luckily no one got hurt. But when you look at the way his wife was holding that handgun, someone could have very easily gotten hurt. I mean, man.
Yeah, it's easy.
She ignores the fact that that handgun couldn't shoot because the trigger pin in it had actually been altered to make it not shootable. So she actually wasn't endangering anyone, which is why she was charged with harassment instead of assault. But facts don't really matter to people like the Young Turks.
Easy to focus on the fact that she looks ridiculous. I get it. I'm focusing on it right now. Even as I'm saying this, I cannot believe that she keeps putting her hand on her hip like that. And I don't there's no trigger discipline. There's no flip-flop discipline. Maybe put on some shoes.
Him mocking them is actually showing that he has no legitimate argument.
But she is waving a gun. It's like Real Housewives of attempted murder.
Now I want to stop it right there. He says it's like Real Housewives of attempted murder, as if they have been charged with attempted murder. That's a crime. Attempted murder is a felony. It's not a misdemeanor. They were never charged with attempted murder. But he uses that language, and I know he's trying to sound like he's just mocking, but he uses that language, and it's propaganda. It's painting the picture that these people, calling them gun nuts, and then saying attempted murder, and trying to paint this idea that gun owners and people who support guns, and even people who use their guns, it's murder, it's attempted murder. That word murder there, it is propaganda. It is attempting to paint gun owners as homicidal maniacs. And he's doing it in a mocking way, trying to mock her for the way she's got her hand on her hip and talking about the Real Housewives. But the idea of attempted murder isn't any way connected to this case. They were never charged with attempted murder. There's no evidence of attempted murder. But he uses that phrase specifically because he's trying to paint them in a very specific way.
That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah.
And he is pointing that assault rifle at the crowd.
Now he calls that an assault rifle. It's an AR-15. I don't want to get too technical, but again, this is part of the propaganda. An AR-15 is not an assault rifle. Now, some people use the word assault weapon, which has no agreed upon legal definition. But assault rifle has a specified definition, and we're going to look at that definition. Assault rifle, and all I did was go into Google and type up assault rifle. You can do the same. It comes up under dictionary.com, a rapid-fire, magazine-fed, automatic rifle designed for infantry use. Now, they want to call an AR-15 a weapon of war, and so something that's designed for infantry use or for the military, well, we want to call an AR-15 an assault rifle because we want to say it's a weapon of war. But an assault rifle, by definition, is actually an automatic rifle, or you can see over here, even from Wikipedia, an assault rifle is a selective fire rifle. A select fire rifle is a rifle that can go from semi-automatic to fully automatic. It can select which version it's going to shoot in. That being said, an AR-15 doesn't fit that category. An AR-15 that's available to civilians is a semi-automatic rifle, just like most pistols are semi-automatic pistols. They're semi-automatic shotguns. Semi-automatic is not the same as automatic. Now, people miss that clarification. But they're trying to call this an assault rifle because they're trying to paint it as a weapon of war, and it's propaganda.
It is not up. And I understand that, assuming he has had any classes in the past, those are not what is flashing through his mind. He thinks that he's going to be a pint-sized Rambo right there in his pink shirt and khakis.
Now, he claims, again, this is all propaganda. He's saying he thinks he's going to be a Rambo. There is no evidence to suggest he was trying to be Rambo. He didn't charge up. He stayed back away from the protesters. He didn't charge them. He didn't go on the offensive. He didn't shoot his gun or fire it in any way. He simply held it and had it for defense. Self-defense is not being a Rambo, and you can clearly see that was his intention. If he had intention of being a Rambo and not acting in defense, he would have fired the gun, or he would have went up to the protesters with the gun, pointing it directly at them, close up and shooting or arguing with them. He's literally standing back and trying to use the gun to keep them away. That's it. That is not being a Rambo.
You know what,
It's
though, John?
cosplay. It's just cosplay.
I think it's Antifa's fault.
Probably.
Anyway, but
It's Docker's fault. But
let's get to the part that, like, now I'm going to be a downer.
Here's where the real
No, I see
propaganda
stuff like
comes in.
that, and I don't know about you guys. Like, I'm actually really curious. So write in if you want to share, if you agree with me on this. I think about Tamir Rice a lot, and I think about how Tamir Rice, as a 12-year-old boy playing with a toy gun in a park, wasn't ever given the benefit of the doubt. No one was there to defend him. No one was there to pardon him of anything.
Now, I want to stop right there. We're going to talk about Tamir Rice here in just a moment. But the Tamir Rice case and this case are completely different, in no way comparable. And so for her to bring up Tamir Rice, she's bringing it up to make a racial point, which she'll do in a moment, because the McCloskeys are white and Tamir Rice was black. And she's trying to make this argument. It is absolutely race baiting and disgusting. It is propaganda at its finest. This case and that case have nothing to do with each other. Number one, the McCloskeys are pointing their guns on their own home property when a mob of people, a crowd of people, have broken into private property, and they are standing there holding the gun to defend themselves if they get attacked. Tamir Rice was a kid. Now, he had a fake gun. We'll get into that in just a moment. But Tamir Rice was a kid in a park swinging on a swing who kept pulling his gun out, which was a fake gun, but it looked real, and pointing at random people. Not people that broken into his property. He's not on his own property. He has, it's completely different. The McCloskeys, police didn't show up there and then point a gun at the police. With Tamir Rice, the police showed up and he pointed the gun. Now, again, I'm not saying the Tamir Rice shooting was justified. I am simply saying that to compare these two completely different situations just to make a point about race is disingenuous and dishonest, and it's propaganda.
He was shot and killed within 2 seconds of a cop arriving to the scene. Cop didn't ask any questions. He just opened fire and killed a 12-year-old boy who was playing with a toy gun. And the people who defend the McCloskeys, a lot of them thought that the cop was totally justified in what he did.
Now, we'll talk about any case for justification, but she makes that statement without any data to back it up. I personally know people who, and have talked to people who would say that the McCloskeys were absolutely justified and that the Tamir Rice shooting was not. So for her to say a lot of them, and she didn't say all of them, but she's trying to make a lot of them, a majority of them, the big chunk of them, think the Tamir Rice shooting was justified, but the McCloskeys are fine, not getting shot, and they shouldn't have been even charged. Which, again, two completely different situations. But her statement here is just false, and it's just painting her political opponents in a certain light. That's all she's trying to do.
Then they turn around, they're like, yeah, the McCloskeys, totally fine. Let's pardon them. They're good guys. Someone could have gotten killed, because those are real guns. Those are not toy guns. But, hey, they were pointing the guns at protesters we don't like, so...
And this is more propaganda. People it has nothing to do with who the protesters that we don't like or like. You can like the protesters, you can support Black Lives Matter and still think the McCloskeys were justified. So this is nothing but propaganda. It has nothing to do with who the protesters are. It has to do with the fact that you have a fundamental right to self-defense. They broke into a private community trespassing, and he told them they couldn't be there. He claims they yelled threats back at him, which caused him to get the gun. They didn't go on the attack because they didn't like the protesters. They sat there and stood and tried to keep the gun pointed so they wouldn't come, people who supposedly made these threats wouldn't come and attack them. It has nothing to do with liking or not liking the protesters, and that is disgusting to make that argument.
They should be pardoned. Okay.
You're totally right. It's one of the most egregious instances of all these. And I was thinking, he didn't do anything. He's a little kid. Didn't have a gun.
Now, he says he didn't do anything. He was a little kid and he didn't have a gun. Not exactly accurate. He didn't have a real gun, but he had a gun that looked real. Let me show you what the gun looked like. This is what the gun looked like. One of those guns is real. One of them was the gun that Tamir Rice had that was a pellet gun. It is very clear to see that the airsoft gun, that pellet gun, looks real. There's no tip on it to show that it's fake. There's no orange tip. There's no nothing. It looks like a real gun. There is nothing to indicate it's fake. So the cops, when they see a gun like that and have no indication that it could be fake, are going to treat it like it's a real gun. They can't just say, hey, can you bring that gun here real quick and let us determine if it's real before we move forward? Okay, I'm not saying the shooting was justified. I'm not to that point yet. I'm just pointing out that him to say that he didn't have a gun when he had a gun that looked like a real gun is deceptive. It is dishonest. It is propaganda.
Wasn't hurting anyone. And I thought, have you ever heard a right-winger talk about that as an injustice?
Yes, I have heard many right-wingers talk about the Tamir Rice shooting being wrong or tragic or being unjust, or an unjustified shooting. Yes, I've heard that.
No, I haven't.
Well, because they hate the government run amok, you know? And this kid was killed by the government run amok, but it doesn't bother them. And so I searched Ben Shapiro, Tamir Rice, and I found a post from 2015. Remember Tamir Rice? He's the 12-year-old shot by police while going for a pellet gun in his waistband. The left and the media pointed to the situation as evidence that white police officers want to kill black boys. Only one problem. 2 new reports say the killing was justified. Just another incident of media malpractice. So the cops looked into it and said that it was justified, and that means that the media was wrong to say that shooting a 12-year-old who didn't have a gun was wrong? I mean, that's enough for him. He's satisfied.
Of course, because it goes along with his narrative. So of course he'll go along with that. Of course he'll go along with that. I mean, look, by the way, that's just as credible as the Senate Ethics Committee clearing senators of any wrongdoing when they engaged in insider trading. Yeah, it's like, no, we looked into our colleagues and they engaged in the same insider trading that we engage in, so.
It's cool.
So let's address this, because this is complete lies and propaganda. This is the tweet, or actually it was a Facebook post at the time, from Ben Shapiro that he read. Remember Tamir Rice? He's the 12-year-old shot by police while going for a pellet gun in his waistband. The left and the media pointed to the situation as evidence that white police officers want to kill black boys. Well, only one problem. 2 new reports say the killing was justified. Just another incident of media malpractice. And Ben Shapiro links to a Daily Wire, which he runs, article that talks about these 2 new reports. So we're going to look at that article, which apparently the Young Turks didn't do, or probably did do and just left it out because they want to lie. So when you go to the Daily Wire's article, they link to this article from NBC News. It's NBC, trusted news source. Tamir Rice, 2 reports conclude officer shooting was justified. Now, they're like, oh yeah, 2 reports of officers looking into other officers or senators looking into other senators, and it's our colleagues. That's a lie. If you scroll down and actually do some research, the Ohio prosecutor gathering evidence in the fatal police shooting of Tamir Rice released 2 reports Saturday that conclude the officer was justified. The separate reports conducted by a retired FBI agent and by a prosecutor in Denver. These were not people connected to the police who did the shootings. These were not even police officers. They were a federal prosecutor and a retired FBI agent who did these investigations, who released these reports. And so this is federal agents, and a federal prosecutor. So one is in law enforcement as an FBI agent or a retired FBI agent. The other one is a prosecutor who would prosecute the cases and would have no reason to defend the police. So this was not police looking into other police. This was not people connected to that police force. This was not people who knew the officers involved. This was completely independent studies by people unrelated, and they are absolutely legitimate sources. They absolutely have credibility. But the Young Turks won't tell you who did the reports. They're just going to pretend oh, it's just two separate reports of police looking into police, that's a complete lie. It's not police looking into other police. What they also don't tell you is that a grand jury will looked at the criminal charges. So when this article was released about the two reports, the grand jury hadn't looked at it. But of course, the grand jury did look at it. And look what the grand jury did. They declined to indict officers in the case. And they looked at all the evidence, and they determined that there was not enough evidence to support charges. By the way, the grand jury is not made up of police investigating police. A grand jury is made up of citizens just like a regular jury. It's pulled from the same exact jury pool as a jury at a trial would be. And it's usually like 20-something people or 18 to 20 people versus the smaller number for a trial jury. So grand jury, a bunch of people who are citizens who had no reason to protect the police, declined to indict the officers. But they don't tell you that. They don't tell you that all the evidence was looked at not just by police saying it was justified. That is a complete lie, and they ignore all of those details. On top of that, the Justice Department, not the police, but the actual Justice Department, they even have a release out here, they looked into the actual evidence and determined that charges were not justified. This is the actual United States Department of Justice, not just the police force, the local police force, not police, it's the actual Justice Department. And they looked at it, they explained multiple things that happened, including the 911 call. And it does say here, the dispatcher did not relay that the individual might be a juvenile or that the gun might be fake. So the officers believed that they were responding to a playground where a grown man was brandishing a real gun at individuals, presumably including children. So they went there with high alert to defend innocent lives. Now, they made a horrible mistake and shot Tamir. And I do think, and to be honest with you, while it was deemed justified, I think it was absolutely could have been handled different. They pulled up, and within 2 seconds of being there, Tamir pulled the gun, and he was probably pulling it to show them that it was a fake gun, but they didn't know that, right? They can't go by, they don't know that. They assume it's a real gun. And he pulls it out, he points it towards them, and they shoot within 2 seconds. They probably should have stayed back initially and not pulled right up to him and yelled through the microphone to put the gun on the ground or something like that and to see what happened. But they didn't, and are they required to do that? I don't know. So it was ruled justified. I don't think it was handled necessarily correctly, and it was absolutely a tragedy. So that being said, you can see here it's just straight propaganda to say police are looking into police, and that makes it justified.
We're going to clear them. That's not a credible investigation.
It is when you actually look at who did the investigation and all the different investigations that were done.
And the same goes for, what anyone has to say in justifying a 12-year-old getting shot and killed because he had a toy gun at a park.
Again, she's leaving out all the context to make a racial point. He wasn't shot and killed because he had a toy gun. He was shot and killed because the police believed that toy gun to be real, which clearly from the picture you can see why they would believe that. And he pointed it at them. They didn't know his age. It's not like they were targeting kids. They didn't know his age. He pointed the gun at them. They believed it to be a real gun, and they shot him. Again, I'm not saying that it was handled right or that they should have shot. I personally believe they should have handled it differently, but that does not change the fact that they weren't shooting the kid because he had a toy gun. That's just leaving out context, all to make a racial point.
You got shot and killed in 2 seconds, no questions asked. No investigation, no questions asked.
When someone points a gun at you, you don't ask questions. When it's not the time to conduct an investigation and ask questions. When someone who is holding what you believe to be a real gun points it at you, that's not the time for an investigation.
Boom, he's gone. But anyway, that's what we're talking about when we talk about systemic racism. That's what we're talking about when we discuss a two-tier justice system.
Now here she goes into the systemic racism and two-tier justice system point. And I want to point out that she is cherry picking examples to make this case. She's picking the example of the McCloskeys, who are in no way comparable to Tamir Rice. She takes those two situations and see, the black kid died, the white couple gets pardoned. See, it's systemic racism. No, that doesn't prove systemic racism. She's cherry picking. For example, they even know, the Young Turks, and I'll give them credit at least, they have a video from several years ago when Daniel Shaver, who was a white person, was killed by police, and they do have a video outraged about it, rightfully so. It was definitely a bad shooting, and they shot him for pulling up his pants as they made him crawl. I give them credit for having the video, but then they'll make one video about it when it actually happens and then ignore it and pretend it doesn't happen later so they can make the racial point. Why are they not comparing Daniel Shaver, who was a white person killed by police, unarmed, no gun, not even a toy gun, no gun with him? And he actually is a little bit more comparable to Tamir Rice because the police were there for the very fact that he had a pellet gun that he actually used to shoot birds. And apparently there were reports of him pointing the pellet gun out a window. And of course he was shooting birds, but someone called 911 because he was pointing the pellet gun, which was a pellet gun rifle style pellet gun, pointing it out the window. They show up. He doesn't have the gun on him when the cops show up, and they still shoot him when he pulls up his pants because they think maybe he's going for a gun. But she doesn't compare, and that's a white guy. A very more similar situation than the McCloskeys. And yet she doesn't compare it to that. She ignores that. She pretends that doesn't exist because that would mess up the narrative of two-tiered justice systems and systemic racism. You want to talk about two-tier justice system? What about the black teenagers who murdered an Uber Eats driver after hijacking his car to steal his car? They get treated as, they're teenagers, they get treated as juveniles, even though one of them is old enough they could be treated as adults, get treated as juveniles, won't see jail time past the age of 21. Kyle Rittenhouse, who is 17 years old, who is white, acts in self-defense after getting attacked and is facing life in prison for it. But no, that messes with the narrative. Do you see the propaganda here? I'm not saying that racism doesn't exist, but when you cherry pick examples that don't really equal or match up together, they're not comparable, you cherry pick the examples to say, see, black person dead, white person alive, systemic racism, that's it. You're not proving systemic racism. But people who are buying into the propaganda will hear it and don't think rationally or critically through the issues and will believe that this is systemic racism. It's dangerous and it is straight up propaganda.
Certain people get treated differently by cops. Certain people get treated differently by our justice system. The McCloskeys get a pardon by a governor, and Tamir Rice gets shot and killed within 2 seconds.
No way comparable.
12-year-old boy with a toy gun. It is what it is. That's
with a toy gun that looked real that he pointed at police. Daniel Shaver, a white guy, doesn't even have a gun, gets shot by police. But we don't want to talk about that.
The country we live in. But don't ever complain about it because, you're just a liberal snowflake. You don't support the cops. Now, of course, right-wingers don't support the cops when it's inconvenient to. Like Capitol Police or DC Metropolitan Police.
Sometimes you need to beat them to death.
Sometimes.
No one beat a cop to death. I do not support what happened on January 6th. Every one of them were criminals and should pay for their crimes. I completely condemn the attack on the Capitol. That being said, no one beat a cop to death. And she corrects herself. We're not even going to watch it. She corrects herself in a moment. And she says, beats them within an inch of their life. No one died from being beaten at that riot. It was wrong, but it's just propaganda. She's saying right-wingers support the police sometimes. Well, right-wingers support the police as a whole. There are times where we look at police and we call them bad apples. That's a common argument from the right. But she is trying to paint all of the right wing as the people who attacked the Capitol. That is false. It is propaganda. It is actually bigotry, and it's incorrect. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Be on the lookout for propaganda. Don't fall for it. If you like this episode, if you like this channel and this content, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, like the video, and comment. I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for watching. For more videos, click subscribe and hit that notification bell. And if you enjoyed the video, click that like button. See you next time.